My guest today is a commercial leader and strategic advisor who has spent his career helping businesses clarify strategy, align teams, and accelerate growth, which is, well, who doesn't want accelerated growth, right? He's been working with leadership teams across lots of different sectors, and he's focusing on the decisions that determine whether a company's strategy actually translate into revenue performance. A very warm welcome to Leadership That Sells. This is the podcast about the real conditions where leadership and sales actually work and where they quietly sometimes just break down. I talk to founders, chief execs, sales leaders, and operators who've all had to make the decisions when the effort was high, the pressure was real, and however, the usual playbooks that you carried with you don't fit anymore. I'm trying not to trade slogans or just pull out five-step frameworks, although they're useful. What we're trying to look for here is to surface patterns, what consistently creates momentum, what gets in the way, what experienced leaders eventually learn to stop doing. Less is more, right? If you are one of those people who's responsible for results and not just ideas, you are absolutely in the right place. And I'm delighted to say, Crispin Thompson, thank you very much indeed for joining me today.
Very, very happy to be here. Let's have a great conversation.
I'm certain of it. I'm certain of it. Looking back across your career, were there some moments where the whole leadership gig just got really difficult, where the strategy sounded really good in theory, but it was actually just too hard to execute in reality? You know, it's a plan. It's theory sounds great until it hits practice. You know, everybody's got a plan until
Yeah,
they get punched in the face, that sort of thing.
yeah, exactly. Until we all have a good battle plan until we're on the field of battle, right?
That's
That's
it.
that's how these things work sometimes. And interesting. I've been the recipient of these amazing strategies and been told to kind of go ye forth and execute. And about a third of my career was truly in strategy roles. So I've also been the person trying to think up these ideas. And a few things have occurred to me over the horizon of my career. One of which is that we should we should be really loath to throw things away because there are plenty of strategies and ideas that maybe don't work today, and I'll talk about a little bit maybe why they don't, but they might be good for tomorrow. And conversely, right, things that work today may not work tomorrow too. That there's conditions that need to be like business conditions and alignment and funding and all of these other things that can come across. But when as someone who kind of sat astride those things of being a little bit of the person who was meant to help think and shape and drive ideas, but also kind of turn them into action. I think of a lot of times when there would be some problem, some big urgency thing that had risen to the C-suite or the CEO, and it's this is the urgent thing we have to fix now. And what was always interesting about some of those was that they were often not new. They were kind of like conditions that we all understood, and unfortunately, sometimes it was conditions that not only we understood but we had accepted. This is the way things are, and we cannot we cannot solve. We I had an opportunity a bunch of years ago to take over a big organization that had a very, very large mandate and what I later understood to be a very hyper complex kind of set of conditions and operations and things to run. But I was told at the very beginning, two things had to be true. I had to turn it around, and the organization was kind of grossly overspent. So I had to reshape it from a cost perspective and turn it around. And those are sometimes diametrically opposed actions, right? The how do you turn something around and take dollars out? And this piece of go fix it right now wasn't unattractive to me, right? Because this was something to kind of go and do, but the kind of take away the the dollars, which meant people, and kind of restructure around, put me in an interesting position because I was coming into an organization that was large and established, and I was a little bit of an unknown quantity. There was maybe 300 people in the organization, and maybe four of which I had worked with in my career prior to that. So it was I was not well known, And I think prior to that point, a lot of what I had been known for across the organization was this sort of reshaping of workforce stuff, right? So maybe not the most positive reputation kind of following sometimes about what I was doing in certain organizations. And so we had this really strong top-down mandate. You've got to fix this. These we've been red in metrics for too long, and we sort of kind of I knew the first thing I had to do was take the cost out, and I made the decision, even though it wasn't required of me, to take it all out immediately because I felt like if I was doing little pieces over time, that pain would just be felt for so long. And the my initial kind of tactic here was identify the costs that could come out, take it out as quickly as we possibly could, feel that pain immediately, and then let the team, the kind of new direct staff to me, understand that this is our opportunity now, reshape as you want within within guidelines so that we can begin to execute. And then we had this piece around one of the most, let's say, externally facing aspects of what we did was we were kind of paying a segment of our constituents, and we hadn't paid on time in a really long time. And they I had seen, or we're starting to see presentations inside my own organization that said this couldn't be done. So I talk about this like the things we accept is true. And the answer was we cannot be green in these metrics. It cannot be done. There's too many moving parts, there's too many whatevers. And back to how do we translate the we have to do something into execution? I knew that I had some runway because it had been red for so long. Then I was the new person. I had some runway before I would be seen as failing in this endeavor, but it wasn't going to be forever. This wasn't a forever thing. And so rather than try to say, oh no, we're going to make it green, we're going to, force it through or whatever, just knowing we didn't have a lot of room for investment, I sat down and I said, what can we do? What's the thing we can do that we can do consistently? Show me what that is, whether that's red or green or yellow or whatever, but show me what we can do consistently. And then I said, if we had to be to green and we knew that we couldn't solve it, let's say technologically, there going to be no new system that could come in and save us, what would it take? And I think that was a very freeing kind of question as a leader to come in and say, well, just tell me what you would need. If we knew that the system could only do so much, what would you need? And they started saying things, oh, well, we'd need more people. And I said, well, hang on, let's with what we have, what would we need? And a lot of it came down to we needed more consistency on input, so cleaner data, which is the bane of all of us these days, and everything we do, no matter whether we're in technology or not. But also, it really boiled down to rigor, and that was really interesting to me because for an organization that had struggled to achieve for so long, to be able to come in and say, what we really need to do is just get down, do kind of bare knuckle activities and really get down and knuckle into the work and do exhausting many times a day reviews and then daily reviews and then twice a week reviews kind of thing. But put this rigor in place of you're going to do this much, we're going to inspect this much, we're going to see what worked and what didn't, and we're going to kind of keep this immediate cycle of improvement. And it didn't happen overnight, but it did by the third quarter, we were back into green in almost everywhere. And then after that quarter, we sustained it for 12 quarters or something, right? So, and it all started with just tell me what it would take to make this right, and how do we focus in on this in a way. And so it was interesting because obviously my predecessors in that organization, however many there had been given the same mandate, do this right, and had failed. And I can't say why they'd failed, what other distractions had been, but the conditions were right in my time to say, show me what it would take to do this as good as we can, and what does good look like, and let's achieve that. And then how do you get to the next step? And what was kind of interesting as I was doing reviews upwards after that was when it became a success story and we wanted to kind of sell it as a success story within the company, it wasn't as attractive as a success story as I would wanted it to be, because it didn't take some technological investment. It didn't take some reshaping of business conditions. It just took get back to basics and then run the machine as well as you can. And that became an interesting really lesson for me that sometimes, especially today, right, when there's an AI solution around every corner, that we tend to want to look to technology to solve first when when underlying process is the area to look at first and look at the human side of these things first so that we can then layer on great technology on top.
I think what you find, and it goes back to the very first things I did in my career. I was a trainer teaching people how to use SAP, big,
Okay.
hairy computer system. And it was the early days of people automating business processes. And I worked with Woolworths, and they were automating their accounts payable process in the UK. And they were known as being a phenomenal payer, pretty much because they paid every invoice that hit the desk. No reconciliation, no purchase orders, nothing. So they were automating what was an appalling process. Now, at that point, had I known what I knew, I would think, well, the way to make money in this gig is to set my own company up and start sending Woolworths invoices. Yeah, 500,000 albums for, automatically paid, no validation. But what they were doing was scaling a very poor process. They were just scaling failure. And you see this when companies go through the pain of growth and they get something and they say, right, we've got it. We're just going to multiply. We're
Yeah.
just going to scale this. Well, no, because the thing itself doesn't work. And now you with AI or with technology, especially with AI, you find that an A player can become an A star. A B player can kind of become like an A minus. But a C player with these tools becomes an F minus because their shitty process, frankly, is multiplied and leveraged by thousandfold,
Yeah.
not
You just do bad
clean.
stuff faster.
That's it. You do bad stuff faster and more of it. Yeah, that's it. When
Yeah. If we don't focus on process, and especially today, if we don't understand the data and
yeah,
the cleanliness of it, it's a recipe for future disaster. And the future may not be 10 years, it may be 10 weeks
if you're lucky, I'm
if you're
waiting to
lucky.
see what companies are forced into failure by some of these tools, by the misuse of some of the tools. And I don't mean misuse in any sort of cyber security or abuse way. I think it's just using them incorrectly because previously I think you could catch somebody who was just doing things badly. I don't mean wrong or incorrectly, I just mean badly, poorly
Mhm.
executing something. Whereas now, all of a sudden, you've got an agentic system that is going to take my crappy process, multiply it by 100,000, and hit send. And that's ouch.
Yeah, yeah. Not only is it ouch, it's costly in many many ways. And you kind of talked about where are we going to see some of these companies flop, and we're already seeing interesting shifts where companies that doubled and tripled down just maybe 8 or 12 quarters ago into AI and early AI and put on top that are now kind of and went ahead and cut heads are now
Yeah.
having to kind of quietly pull heads back and things because of the cost they didn't understand around AI, around tokenism, that sort of thing, but also just just to this point, like some of these things have you've just multiplied to a scale you couldn't previously have understood some of the small problems that have now become really really big, and you're having to kind of work through them in a very unfortunately kind of manual way.
I think it's as well. I mean, you're talking about process here, and I think it's from a leadership point of view, it's the eternal thing. The guys and the girls at the front line, the chalk face and the cold face, call it what you like, digging away, are the ones who actually understand the business. You might have the strategy and direction you've been flown in to do and to fix something. And you come in and you say, this is what we're going to do. And everybody's going, yeah, okay, let's do that. Not. Because they know that whatever it is you're asking is either impossible or just ill-advised. You then bash on regardless, or cut the heads because you're going to use a new tool to do whatever it was they were doing, not realizing that agentically you cannot code. You can do okay, but you should not, as I think it was Amazon did, push something into production that in 20 seconds deletes 9 million data points and causes you, you know, 500 grand's worth of missed orders a second for the next 20 days,
Mhm.
which you then need to back out, have somebody else review who actually knows what they're doing, look at the boss and say, I did tell you, boss. And
Yeah.
boss goes, okay. It's this the amplification of failure or the misunderstanding of how your own business works. So When you work a lot with leadership teams. When you are trying to do this, when you're trying to take some nice PowerPoint strategy and turn it into an outcome that actually sticks, where do you most often see that gap, the gap between strategy, the gap between strategy and execution?
Well, I think the first thing, if I'm asked to kind of come in and talk about, what are we seeing and how we're going to do it, one of my first questions is, where has the as we plan this great idea, where has it gone before? Meaning, has it gone upwards and downwards, or has it only gone upwards inside the organization? If it's only gone upwards, my first recommendation is let's pull some of the people that are closer to the work and let them, kind of bring them into the conversation and just let them understand what's coming and let that be a little bit of an early sanity test
Mm.
for us. Not that it changes maybe necessarily what we're going to do or what we have to do or what the decision was, but it begins to highlight maybe where are we going to have potential challenges, even if it's something like just around change management, like how much are we going to have to push rope in this particular
Mm.
scenario versus do we get good pull from the constituency. The other side of this is like one thing I always want to ask is what does winning look like, or what does good look like on the other side of this? And because a lot of times you'll come in, they'll be in this amazing, Bain or McKinsey or Accenture driven idea from the beginning, and it's all about
PowerPoint.
yeah, here's what's going to be done. I'm like, yeah, but when that's done, what happens? And I think it's a really powerful question because it's sometimes not as well understood, or it's understood differently by different
Mhm.
members of the business, that's being affected. And when we say, oh, we're going to put in this new, let's say, agentic system that's going to handle incoming orders and is going to process returns, some people are going to hear, oh, that means that's going to lower costs, or oh, that means that's going to speed up the order time to ship time, or that's going to reduce errors. And those things may be true, but they may not be, right? If we looked at the end-to-end cycle time of an order, and we looked at the first 2 hours was receiving the order and processing the order, and everything else was in the warehouse and picking and building or shipping it, then we're not going to save a lot of time on that cycle, right? We're in fact, if we had a consistent backlog of orders to be entered, we might actually create a problem, right? Because now, if everything's going to happen at lightning pace instead of maybe a steady 2 hour drip drip drip, then suddenly the logistics system can't handle the inflow, or the picking system, or it's going to be a huge mismatch from demand plans and all these things, right? So kind of looking at all these things. So asking that question up front of what does good look like, or what do you think we're going to get out of this, is a really great kind of opening salvo, because it helps make sure that we're as aligned as the slides suggest we are. And then we can start to put around what would success measures look like.
Mhm.
Because if we cannot truly measure the success, whether that's going to be revenue growth, it's going to be improvement to profit, it's going to be improvement to some kind of operational metric, then you're really, really likely to fail, because the instant there becomes a question of how do we want to reprioritize maybe funding or investment in the future, if we cannot show what we've done, the next big flashy slides will come in and take the dollars that maybe we were counting upon. But if we took those moments up front to say, what does good look like? How do we know it will be working? And then how are we going to measure that? And then measure against it? Then you're setting yourself up to not just be successful, but have a fighting chance to compete against the next shiny toy that will come down the road too, because there's only so many dollars for transformation and things to come along. And so one of the things that I always like to do is make sure that we've got good kind of structure around how are we going to talk about things, how are we going to know how it's going to work, how often are we going to talk about that, making sure that this isn't a thing that we're really excited about on June 10th of 2026, but by July 10th we've forgotten about. We have to have a good cycle. And then the same thing about the people that will be affected by it. So downstream, if this is some new technological tool, let's start to bring them in, make sure they understand what it is that's going to happen. And this is where a lot of time gets spent in, from kind of like consulting or coaching from my company, is how do we change those messages, right? Because if you're kind of in the middle, you're maybe a little bit of a designer, a little bit of responsible for execution, but then you have to talk upwards to the C-suite and downwards into the operators. How do you shape the messages? How do you know which piece to kind of say
Mm.
so that we're driving as smooth a resolution as we can, or as smooth an outcome as we can, without causing undue panic from the C-suite or undue or hard to see kind of pushback. You talked about the people on the front line who say, "Sure, we'll try it, but we know it's not going to work." That's a when that attitude is seeped in there, that's really difficult to actually kind of move the needle on things, because on paper they're doing the work, but in practice they may not be, because
Yeah.
they don't believe in it, don't have our heart into it. So how do we have those kind of continued selling points? And then back to, how do we know what good looked like, and how do we have those metrics in place, continues to help kind of show here's what's happening, and then it allows you to adjust. Because if we expected it to go from red to yellow to green and we've gone from red to red, maybe it's early, maybe we misunderstood the impact, maybe we've picked the wrong metric, maybe there was something else, and but it without a place to start and measure, you're kind of setting yourself up for not a lot of success down the road.
So if you are then one of those poor sods who's actually responsible for delivering that number, you're wherever you are in the organization, are there some specific signals that would tell you that the commercial engine in particular of a business is starting to drift off course?
Yeah, I think the if you're not embedded with the kind of business owners that are related to your outcomes, that's tough, right? Because if you don't already hear what is it that they care about, and how do they look at their own business? So regardless of what your responsibilities are, regardless of what the transformation said it's going to do, if you don't understand how they look at their own business, you'll have an early, potentially early disconnect that would be maybe hard to detect, but will become, bigger over time. And, the back to kind of understanding what is the outcome we're trying to drive to, what does good look like. I think, again, having those things in
Mm.
place allows you to anchor back. But I think a lot about, there was a big deal that I was a part of back in my Hewlett Packard days, where we were given a mandate by the CEO of, you're going to go and fix this. This is something that we know we're hemorrhaging business because of this one thing we need to fix. And we had a heavy effort, and we began to fix it, and we began to see turnaround, and then the world shifted on us, because it was, hey, that's great, but what is it doing to grow revenue? And growing revenue is great, but that was never part of our mandate.
Mm.
But now it had been shoveled under our umbrella in a way that it was, this was an extra portion that we had to eat. We had never asked for it, and but you're going to eat it. And of course it also made it kind of attractive to us too, because now it's more, it was an more interesting story to
Mhm.
sell. And so we then had to kind of watch these things. And when you're talking about a big multinational corporation, that big multinationals really kind of run as country subsidiaries. And so you have the corporate side of it, which is where I sat, but the work is happening in the UK and France and Mexico and Japan and these places. So how do you create those connections? Because that became really, really a potential, flare up for us, was understanding, as we were trying to drive change X into country Y, if we weren't watching the kind of the commercial engine side of it, we weren't watching the revenue and the margin and attach rates and these things in a very robust way, then it would immediately become at least perceived as, or communicated as, this doesn't work. And so we had to play offense, not defense, right? We could not wait for perceived to be negative news to come to us. We had to make sure we were really, really ahead of it. So it was a lot of words to say that, when you have to keep your finger on the pulse, and the has to be around solid understanding of the business, understanding if it is there seasonality at play, is there new market shifts, is there new product lines, because especially when you're trying to drive change, when you're trying to drive effective change that the company has seen as this is necessary, if it wasn't a full buy-in from all stakeholders in all places, then every little blip will be seen as, you caused this. And so you have to immerse yourself in, and that's why I say you have to stay connected with the people of the business, and how do they view it themselves. you immerse yourself in these things so that you can speak ahead of time and say, oh no, we knew already this is we have a natural dip from June going into July. It's seasonality due to summer buying, or we have a natural spike from June to July because it's like US public sector stuff that spikes in the summer and ahead of the new school year kind of thing. And so, but allowing yourself to speak the language of the business owners, it
Mhm.
allows you to be more connected to understand, did this positive or negative thing that's happening in the kind of the revenue side of the business, really, can it be attributed to you? Because if it's successful, by all means, bang the drums. And if it's not, don't be afraid of it. Make sure you can help explain it. And if it is, like, if something you've done, then you've got to find a way to own that, and kind of keep that notion of, here's where we're going. We're all use like a hockey expression, like we need to skate to where the puck is going to be, right? And we've got to get there together if we all want to succeed and score.
So you're talking about speaking the language of the business owners there, of the revenue
Mhm.
responsibles. What would you say? I mean, I don't know if you've seen this. What sort of leadership behaviors are the ones that undermine this strategy most?
So the there's a few things. I think when we pick your term, but we a lot of times you'll have this sort of like fiefdoms or tribalism that exists in really, really big companies, and you let kind of entrenched senior leaders feel like, yes, obviously we're all gonna be successful as a company, but this is my space. And I think when we allow people to kind of speak in I, not we terms, especially when you're kind of driving a bigger transformation, that's a red flag to me, right? It's
Mm.
a red flag that we may have concerns about kind of quiet pushback or change management type issues that we're going to have to kind of potentially mitigate against. But the other side could be true too. Like if we have a I own my space, we do it's I me. Then if there is early success, we also may have to, in their area, we also may have to kind of worry about them kind of taking on like it's all about them, right? So rather than this is a shared success or shared risk, they say, oh no, we did this because of me, or me and my team. And that's great, but this ego thing then kind of has a negative halo over everyone else too, right? Because now they feel like their work wasn't recognized. It's not truly about them. And so this kind of hyper fixated on their own space thing is a great way for potential failure to occur, because I want us to have pride and ownership, but we also have to play on the same team, and we need to understand roles. So ways to kind of mitigate that, I think, is for sure early and often communication with your kind of core stakeholders, making sure that everyone is kind of seeing what's going on. It also helps to kind of sit down and whether it's virtual like this or in person, but kind of understand the motivations of, especially if we're talking about C-level or very senior executives, so that we can, you as the leader, you as the owner, you as the communicator, can tailor our messaging, right? Because as much as we'd like to pretend otherwise, there's psychology in all this too, right? If we know that you, Paul, are you're really, really hyper focused on revenue growth, then we want to make sure that we're talking about how this is going to either help you grow revenue or certainly not keep you from growing it. And we want to focus in on that, even if that maybe isn't the kind of core deliverable that we're trying to go. We want to make sure that you understand the thing that you care about is something that we acknowledge and care about too. And I think that can help. There's the shiny toy syndrome is the one that has probably plagued me the most around kind of delivering things where we get great buy-in, everyone is sold, there's no questions about what great looks like, we have aligned on the metrics, and then 2 months in, somebody else has a great new idea, or they heard some cool thing on a podcast, right? And they want to go and do that. And how do we how do we try to protect ourselves from, we just want the new thing, or keeping our senior executives or senior stakeholders from just wanting to chase that new thing? that's a huge, it's a huge waste of investment, right? Because you might want to end up starting things and never finishing them, or half finishing them, and so you never realize the ROI. But it's also greatly demoralizing for the teams that have to actually do the work, because they will never fully believe in idea number two or number three if they saw one and two get started and stop so quickly because of
Well,
whatever was brand new and flashy.
mm. I used to call it in-flight magazine syndrome. The chief
I
executive would
love
come in
it.
and say,
I
"Oh, we've
love
got to
it.
do this thing."
I love it.
Yeah,
It's the
and
Sky Mall syndrome. Yeah.
that's it. So the trick was, especially you're traveling British Airways, you had two. You had the BA magazine and you had the BA business magazines. You always picked up the business one, put it in your pocket, and read it in the hotel, so that you knew that if one of the flyers, oh, and we should be doing it should be we should be transversalizing our synergies. And I was, oh, okay,
I
I
know
know
you
where
heard
you're
that.
coming from. Uh, Crispin, if there was one message you could leave to the universe, well, if I give you the world's largest Sharpie and 1,000 billboards at every major airport, what are you going to scrawl in relatively neat handwriting so everybody could see the one thing that you think is important?
I think uh, like any good person with a Sharpie, it's not going to be one thing. It's going to be two things.
That's all.
So the first thing is, and this is an oft repeated statement from myself, but it's you almost never get what you don't ask for. And I think that's huge. It's maybe grammatically tenuous, but hugely important, because whether whether it's about career, whether it's about transformation, whether it's about just you as a leader or us in life, luck happens, and good things can happen to us. But if we are willing to state what we want, and especially if we're like involved in strategy and we need to drive, like we need to ask for, if we need help, we need revenue, what does good look like? We need to be willing to stand on our own pedestal and say, ask the questions that need to be asked. We should, there's very little gain in subtlety, and therefore be clear, be concise, be confident, be direct, but ask the questions that need to be asked, and be willing to acknowledge that some of the responses may not be what we
Mm.
anticipated. So I think that one's hugely important. And then the other side of this is, and again, this is more just from a leader perspective, but know who you are and be who you are. And that may not tie in as directly to a lot of the other things that we've covered here today, but I think if you're a leader, and whether you are the architect of amazing new strategies and things that are going to drive your company upwards and to amazing heights, or whether you're the recipient of these things, if you know what you're good at, and you know where you maybe have blind spots as a leader, it will keep you from exposing yourself or your teams or your company into areas that you shouldn't go into, because you already knew if you're strong, be strong, and if you're not, find someone to sit next to you who is strong in that area, or get better at it, right? I mean, it may be that you can train yourself into something new, but if you're not, know where your blind spots are and help fill them with others. So know who you are, be who you are.
Know who you are, be who you are. What are you working on right now? It's exciting.
So we do a lot of focusing around helping leaders just be better leaders. That's the kind of the bread and butter of what we do. But increasingly, because there is not a day that goes by when we don't have those two letters AI that get dropped in. One thing that I'm finding really exciting is more companies that are coming to us and asking us to help train kind of cadres and executives on AI readiness. And I think that's and what's, or even just make, like we have one company said, make sure my execs understand that data is the first thing. Stop them from being excited about whatever GPT or LM or new thing they saw in the BA business magazine, but make them understand the foundation that has to be fixed as these things come along. And so the if you'd asked me 2 years ago, where do I think the biggest bang for the buck can come from what we're doing here, I wouldn't have said it's kind of data and AI training, but I think it's really exciting, and I love that companies are asking us, because it means that they themselves understand the importance of kind of spreading the message, and they're starting to realize that shiny toy is not always the answer. We need, maybe it's the answer, but we've got to be ready for that toy. We need to make space in the garage for it. Whatever we need to do, we've got to get there, and we need people to help us kind of move along the way.
So, the future of AI is human.
Future of AI is human. I may even have written a book about the importance of still being human right now in AI.
Yeah.
And that's my little plug for the human advantage, emotional intelligence in the age of AI. So I do still believe we humans have a role to play.
And a link to the book and to Crispin's company will be in the description of this episode. It just remains for me then to say, Crispin Thompson, thank you very much indeed for joining.
My absolute pleasure, Paul.